Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank everyone, both members of the committee and the public who are watching this meeting, for their patience today. And I just want to let everyone know that over the course of the last, almost 3 hours at this point, there have been some really good conversations that have been happening between Representative Fox and Senator Sampson and Representative Mastro Francesco and myself, trying to find some consensus on the items that are on our agenda today. And while we may not find that consensus this afternoon on these two particular bills as is, I'm just really grateful that there seems to be a real strong bipartisan willingness to try to find a bipartisan solution to the issues that we're looking at in this committee meeting this afternoon, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to get there. And I just wanted to let everyone know that so they could understand why they were looking at the dark screens for several hours today, and just express gratitude that we are able to have those kinds of conversations, and that will hopefully inform our work moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Flex. I just wanted to make one clarifying point earlier. When we went into recess, we'd already convened the meeting and then went into recess, which is why the delay was made, just for clarification purposes of individuals trying to join the meeting via YouTube or whatnot. There may have been a bit of a hiccup with the connection on YouTube, but it's just because we convened the meeting quickly and then quickly went into recess. I apologize about that. Senator Sampson, any opening comments or remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, my phone started ringing the second I turned off my mute button. I just wanted to concur with Senator Flexer's comments and your own. I'm very appreciative that we had the opportunity to get together kind of behind the scenes to talk about the two bills on our agenda today. And I look forward to productive conversations going forward. I was prepared to make quite a stand today on these issues. I'm still going to do my best to try and make sure that I point out the concerns in a orderly but as quick a fashion as I can. But I look forward to a productive meeting and productive conversations going forward, as I said. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Mastro, any comments or remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, just thank everybody for hanging in tight today for quite a while. And I appreciate the efforts by the chairs to communicate with us and keep the discussion open. Although we may not agree today, we hope that going forward, there could be some consensus with all of us, but I think it's important for the state of Connecticut and all of the voters. So I look forward to a good meeting today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions or comments, move on to section 3 of the agenda, bills for final action. Senate Bill 184. An act extending through November 8th, 2022, several changes regarding election administration as a result of COVID-19 and concerning eligibility to vote by absentee ballot. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Senator Fletcher, second by Representative Blumenthal. The underlying bill reinstates the COVID-19 related provisions passed in 2021 implementer and extends them to the 2022 state election and any election primary referendum held through November 8th, 2022. In addition, the bill authorizes qualified voters to vote by absentee ballot if during the hours of voting they are unable to appear at the polling place because of illness rather than because of the voter's own illness, and also makes additional changes to align the underlying AB statute with the Constitution. Any discussion? Senator Sampson, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's hard to kind of figure out.
Senator, can I just take the floor back one more second?
By all means.
I apologize. I think that we need to I think there's a motion actually to JFS, not JF. So I apologize about that. There's a substitute language. So I guess we'll go. Do I need to remake the motion? I guess a motion to JF. Sorry, Senator Fletcher, go ahead.
I'm happy to make my motion at JFS.
Motion JFS by Senator Flexer. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Blumenthal. The JFS language is LCO 2783. One technical change in section, I believe it was section 12 of the bill. There was a drafting error, which this section, unlike all the other sections, did not include, but prior to November 9, 2022, in section 12D, line 544, that language is now included. So with that being said, any discussion? Senator Sampson, the floor is still yours. I apologize. Thank you for your patience, Senator, sir.
It's quite all right, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to get my bearings. I have so many documents and papers in front of me that it might be difficult to keep track. I had planned on going kind of through this bill in a section by section way, because I do have some concerns with the Senate bill that are not in the House bill that are before us. And I'll just say, for the information purposes of those watching and the rest of the committee, that the two bills on our agenda today are very similar. And some of the language is identical, in fact. The Senate bill is the one we are talking about first, and it is a lengthier bill, and it has a lot more meat to it. The main difference in the Senate bill is that this bill contemplates extending the rules and requirements for voting as have been accomplished in the last several elections because of COVID-19. And I'll just state from the outset that I don't know that that's appropriate any longer. The governor has since rescinded his state of emergency. It's understood that the state of Connecticut General Assembly has declared its own state of emergency. But from the discussion, I think it was clear this was really a formality to satisfy the federal requirements to continue some aid to the state, and not so much that we are in a continued state of emergency. I've been arguing since, shortly after the pandemic began and it became clear that we were going to have an ongoing battle with COVID-19 and our response to it, that the state of Connecticut really has never been in a state of emergency. That's not to say that COVID-19 is not a real thing, and it is a tremendous threat. And over 10,000 Connecticut residents have died as a result of COVID. And those deaths certainly represent a great many emergencies. But the state of Connecticut being in a state of emergency as a state government, that's a separate issue altogether. And in my opinion, the state of Connecticut has never really been in a state of emergency. We've been able to run the state government. The legislature has been able to meet. We've adapted in many ways, including, Zoom meetings and so forth, to accomplish our business. But the state government has been functioning and operating and trying to do so while recognizing that COVID-19 is a concern, but I don't think so an emergency. It's worth noting that in the 2020 election nationwide, there is almost no evidence to suggest that anyone contracted COVID-19 because they voted in person. Nonetheless, our legislature debated and voted on a bill to accommodate expanding the excuse of COVID-19 to allow that to be an eligible reason to vote by absentee ballot in the 2020 election. And we've had a lot of debating and discussion on that topic, as well as the expansion of voting in Connecticut. Early voting is a constitutional amendment that'll be on our ballot this November election. We are in the process of continued discussion about no excuse absentee voting, potentially being a constitutional amendment in Connecticut. So there's no shortage of discussion about these topics. The purpose for me today, really more than anything, is to try and just simply get on the record my position, and I think it's shared by most Republicans, which is that we are very much in favor of increasing access and ease of voting. But we do have concerns about the security of elections and maintaining the integrity of elections. I supported the change to allow for the COVID-19 excuse in the 2020 special session we had in July to discuss that. The one thing I did not know at the time, though, was that there was a plan to have the November election be conducted by a mass mailing of unsolicited absentee ballot applications by the Secretary of the State. And I will maintain today that she had no right to do that. And in particular, because on the ballot application itself, it was indicated by the Secretary of State's own language that any person could check the box for COVID-19. And as much as I'm sympathetic to people's reasons for doing so, I don't believe every person in the state of Connecticut was in fact eligible, no matter how you read the Constitution. And if we wanted to make every person eligible, the only way to accomplish that, in my mind, would be to pass a constitutional amendment for no excuse absentee voting. And I'm on record in the most previous public hearing and many times before, including a vote in the Senate last year to pass no excuse absentee voting in Connecticut, as long as we have some security that goes along with it. So that's my position overall. And I will just say that the bills before us, and specifically Senate Bill 184, these are the concerns I have. The first and foremost concern is that it still contemplates COVID-19 and an emergency as a reason to modify our election laws, and also to grant the Secretary of State a great many, expanded abilities, including how to treat supervised voting in nursing homes, the timeframes for collecting of ballots and informing people of results. And I will touch on a few of those things in a minute, but I want to focus on the major points, which is that I'm not in favor of expanding COVID voting because I don't think it's necessary, and because we are attempting to tackle that by another means in this bill and the companion House bill today, and that's by adapting the language in our statute regarding sickness as a result of a recent Supreme Court decision that indicated that an illness does not necessarily have to be one's personal illness to count as a reason to obtain an absentee ballot. I'll just say that I disagree with that, but I'm willing to live with it. The reason why I disagree with it is because the statute has been written that way ever since 1946, I believe. And no one has ever, in all of this time up until 2020, tried to say that the word sickness really didn't apply to someone's individual sickness until then. And in fact, the Constitution, that amendment that is part of our Constitution, Article 6, Section 7, came into being in 1932. And I've done a fair amount of research trying to look at the historical conversation about how that happened. Sadly, there are not a lot of documents that are retained from that era. But if you follow that history all the way back to the Civil War and the creation of absentee voting and everything else, it's pretty clear to any layman or historian that's looking at it that the purpose of absentee voting was to allow for individuals who could not make it to the polls for a specific reason. And we itemize those reasons in the Constitution and then ultimately in the statute. And no one's questioned the statute in a long, long time. The bill that is before us attempts to modify the statute from referring to my illness. And I believe this is in lines 70 and 71 of the bill that's before us, to simply reflect the word illness. And my concern over this is a couple of things. First and foremost, assuming the Supreme Court is correct, which I don't believe they are, but assuming they are, and we're going to adapt this language to expand a person's reason beyond their own personal illness, the court was pretty clear to say that the individual voter must be affected in some way. And I read that to understand simply that you can be affected by someone else's illness, or in fact, the fear of illness, which was the argument made for COVID voting, that people did not want to go out in person because they were afraid they might contract COVID-19, which is understandable. But that is a different thing from what is in the bill before us, which simply says the word illness. And in fact, correct me wrong, Mr. Chairman, I believe the new substitute language, which we got earlier today, changes that word from illness to sickness, which is the same word used in the Constitution. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
I believe, Senator, that the language in the Senate bill remains illness. believe that they would change sickness just in the House bill.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I knew it
think-
was one of them. And forgive me, I did not have the time today to redo my notes on the new LCOs for the substitute language. I'm still working off the old ones. But either case, whether we're using the word sickness or illness, you can imagine that to simply say that someone is eligible for an absentee ballot because of illness is a different thing altogether from certainly their own illness, but even from suggesting that they are affected by an illness that is their own, their neighbor, their family member, or even their fear of sickness in society. To have just an intangible word there doesn't make any sense. And that's of grave concern to me because I believe in the process of using an intangible word. You can use any intangible word. You could say because of COVID, as was done in the 2020 special session. You could say because of illness. I said in the public hearing, you could say because of spaghetti, because it doesn't matter. If you simply say because of illness, that doesn't mean anything to the reader. That means because there was an illness that existed in the past or will exist in the future, or simply because of the word illness is not the same thing as tying that illness to something that goes back to the voter. And that is what is required. So the conversation that we had offline today with the chairs was really focused on trying to change this language from simply saying illness or sickness to tying it back to a much broader definition that might affect the voter, even though it might not be their personal illness. And I think that is the intent of the Supreme Court's decision, even if I do personally believe that it goes beyond the original intent of the constitutional amendment. So I know I'm talking quite a bit, but this is like a concept that is kind of hard to get to unless you explain a bunch of other things first, I guess I would say. And the reason why it concerns me so much to have an intangible word as an excuse to receive an absentee ballot is that effectively when you do that and you simply say because of illness, and there's no implication that that individual voter is affected by that intangible word, that means that everyone becomes eligible. And this was my concern in the 2020 election, is that the Secretary of the State chose to define every person in the state as being eligible simply because of COVID-19, not even their illness or their fear of COVID-19, but just because of COVID-19. I believe that was wrong. And I believe the court in the state had to make a determination about whether or not they would redefine the word illness to keep her out of trouble or to condemn her for her actions, which I believe were beyond the scope of the constitutional law and beyond what we had done in July of 2020 in special session. And we are here today debating almost the same exact issue, which is, do we want to have a broad, intangible definition which allows every person effectively to become eligible because illness of my neighbor, because illness of my dog, because illness existed in another country 300 years ago. It's not specific enough to tie it to the voter, and that's what needs to happen. And when you do that, you've effectively created no excuse absentee voting, which I'll repeat, I'm in favor of, but requires a constitutional amendment. And in my opinion, the safeguards that go along with expanding that amount of mail-in voting. My fear is that the reason why this language is before us is for that purpose and that purpose alone, to create a backdoor way to no excuse absentee voting. And as a result, I have taken it upon myself, and so have some of my colleagues, to fight it with all our might, because I believe it's wrong, that you need to make a constitutional change. And because if you do this without the proper protocols and you enable a state government or a municipality or even political operatives to begin mailing out absentee ballot applications to every voter, regardless of their tie to any actual illness, you've created no excuse absentee voting. And we saw the problems that occurred in the 2020 election. I have gone through them on the Senate floor in great detail. In fact, I think I listed somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 or 30 individual cases of people who were disenfranchised for various reasons. They were not in receipt of an absentee ballot application, and plenty of other people were in receipt of multiple absentee ballot applications, sometimes for themselves. We had voters who received one in their name and also their married name or their maiden name. We had voters that received them for previous occupants of the residence. We had voters that received them for dead relatives. I can't tell you how many people I heard from who told me that, I got an absentee ballot for my father or my husband who's been dead for 10 years. These are problems, and they were widespread. And during the public hearing, the Secretary of the State herself acknowledged that in the primary mass mailing that occurred in July of 2020, over 100,000 absentee ballot applications were returned in the mail. So those were people that clearly should not have been on the voter rolls because they are not eligible voters at those addresses. In the general election, that number was around 185,000, which were returned. There are so many concerns regarding an unsolicited mailing of this type that it would be difficult to get into them in a short meeting like this. There's the cost of doing so, which I don't believe is appropriate since the vast majority of voters did not take part in using the mailed ballot application. They voted in person. So it was a waste of taxpayer money to mail them one. And a great many people, as I said, did not receive what they were supposed to, or they received ones that they were not. Before the state engages in an activity like that, I believe it is incumbent upon our state government to make sure that the voter rolls are in fact accurate, and they are not. And we've had testimony in this committee on numerous occasions from Fight Voter Fraud and others, in particular, people involved in elections in our major cities, indicating the amount of irregularities that occur. There were also people that attempted to vote using their absentee ballot application, but it got tied up in the mail and it was not received on time to be counted. That's unfortunate. Those people were disenfranchised and their vote was not part of that election. There was an issue in this committee last year where I complained that I had been sent a photograph of a drop box that was outside of a town hall in Connecticut that was overflowing with ballots. And the Secretary of the State, the State Election Enforcement Commission was very pleased to tell me, well, no, Senator Sampson, your argument is all wet because this actually happened the day after Election Day, that photo was taken. But if you're listening, I hope you're as incredulous as I am, because that doesn't solve anything. That's a whole different problem. That means that people who thought they were voting did not have their votes counted because they were placed in the ballot box the day after the election. For me, I think that if you're going to try and increase access, you should do it responsibly. And I'm in favor of increasing access to voting as much as we possibly can. But we shouldn't be doing it without considering the consequences and the necessary safeguards that should be in place. And first and foremost, the voter rolls need to be correct or reasonably correct. And I believe they are unreasonably incorrect right now. I do have some other things to say about the issue of illness versus personal illness, et cetera. But I just want to hit a couple of more points. I'm looking through my notes. I had, as I had said earlier, intended on kind of going through this bill in great detail. But because we are engaged in a conversation, and I am very hopeful that all the parties involved can come to an agreement that satisfies the concerns I just made. First and foremost, that we are, even if we are inclined to expand the definition of an illness beyond the actual voter, it still has to be something that affects that voter. And we cannot simply leave an intangible word like illness hanging out there without a direct meaning. That's number one. And number two, before we create a situation where every voter in the state becomes eligible for an absentee ballot through a mechanism like this, we should prohibit the unsolicited mailing of ballot applications until there is a mechanism to do it honestly. And I think there's far better ways to do it anyway. I think, and I suggested this to the Secretary of the State, that it costs millions of dollars. She was quoted as saying $1.5 million to mail the ballot applications. But my research, including an image that I have that says it came from the Secretary of the State's office. I don't know, I haven't verified that, but it looks like it came right from the website for the Secretary of State. It shows that the amount was much closer to $7.5 million for that mailing of absentee ballot applications. To me, I think that's unnecessary when the vast majority of people are not going to use it. And we should really create an environment where it becomes so much easier for a voter to participate in a mail-in ballot process of their own accord. What I'm saying simply is, instead of just willy-nilly mailing them out to millions of people who may or may not use them, let's find a way to educate voters that they have access to vote by mail and give them the tools to do so. Toll-free number, a website, the application's available at the post office. You can text, 311 to 555. You can do a lot of things to increase the ease and access of someone getting a ballot application, other than wasting taxpayer money in mailing them out to people who may or may not be eligible voters on a current voter roll. The only other thing I will add to this conversation is maybe some specific points from the language in this bill that I would like to draw the chair's attention to, so that if we do continue this conversation and we do come up with some new language, maybe these items can be considered as well. Section 5 of this bill empowers the Secretary of the State to make any necessary changes in forms to conform them to changes in applicable law, I think is the language. And that's through November 9th. I have two things to say. One is that I don't feel that it's appropriate to grant the Secretary of State that kind of power ever. I have already mentioned my concern with how she handled the November 2020 election and indicating that every voter is eligible, when I don't believe that's accurate or constitutional. And second, even if you did believe that and you thought it was good policy, why on earth would we make it simply run through the day after this next November's election? It's either good policy or it's not. And I don't see any reason to have this policy. But if you're going to argue that it is, then why have a deadline? Section 11.
Do you have a line number? Do you have a line number? Line number by chance?
I can probably figure it out pretty quick.
No.
I'm pretty quick, Mr. Chairman. You don't have to worry. I won't belabor it too much.
No problem. Thank you.
In section 11, which deals with the process for checking the inner envelopes for signatures and rejecting, those that are unsigned, et cetera. This is another case where that section expires on November 9th. It increases the time ahead of election day in which ballots can be processed. And we've had lengthy conversations just about this situation. I am very concerned about increasing the number of absentee ballots in the state without having a mechanism to properly sort them, have enough staff at local polling places so that they can accommodate, what is a huge new task for them. People that vote in person do the lion's share of the work. They're filling out their ballot and walking over to the machine and plugging it in. But a mail-in vote requires a lot more effort on behalf of the people working the polls and counting them. And when you increase that number substantially, you have to accommodate that. And that is easy to recognize, but I don't believe we are providing any resources in this bill to do that, for one thing. And I don't know that it's wise to simply increase the time ahead of the election that those ballots can be processed. We could talk about what processed means. I don't believe it means counted, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, there's always the concern over making sure that these ballots are preserved, that they are secure, and that the chain of custody is uninterrupted. I don't know where it is in this language also, but I still remain concerned over drop boxes. If they are to be utilized, I think they have to be utilized in a way that mirrors some other states that actually have some security protocols to protect them, instead of leaving them unattended, unfilmed, questionable about who's actually emptying the boxes and transporting the ballots. Those are things that really should be addressed if you're going to have that as part of your election process. And then section 12, which I know that the chairman already mentioned, that this section is supposed to expire on November 9th. The original version of the bill allowed this section to continue into perpetuity, which was a grave concern of mine. So I'm pleased that the substitute language does fix that. But this is the section that deals with giving the Secretary of State the authority to waive certain requirements when it comes to people who are doing supervised voting for people in, patients in a nursing home as an example, but that type of setting. And I don't believe that we should ever undermine that process at all. I think that is one of the most significant opportunities for fraud to occur in our system. And for us, for any reason to waive the supervision of that process, I think is really, really concerning on its face. I am pleased that we did restore the November 9th there, because if that was to continue into perpetuity, that would be reason enough to stop this legislation from going forward. There are 18 sections in this bill. I could say something about just about each one of them. But my number one concern in every one of those sections is the expansion of authority to the Secretary of the State. The Secretary of the State should have the ability to oversee elections and should have some latitude. But the items that are contained in here, I believe, go way beyond what is reasonable, even in the case of a global pandemic. And I don't believe that there's any reason to continue these things in the current state of affairs. And I will just leave it right there as far as that goes. Mr. Chairman, I know we had a very nice conversation offline, and I am very hopeful that we are going to get to some language that is, as you said, bipartisan and not even a compromise, because I believe that the amendment that I brought to you, along with my fellow ranking member, Representative Master Francesco, is moving all the way in your direction, which is to say, the way that this bill has been described and the rhetoric surrounding it is that we are expanding the definition of illness to anything that affects the voter, even if it's indirectly affecting the voter. And I have drafted an amendment for that purpose. It is, as I said from the outset, not my solution to this bill, but it is my offer of compromise, because letting this bill pass and become law as it is, I believe, creates no excuse absentee voting through a statutory scheme and is unacceptable. And I would much rather do it the right way, even if I don't agree with the interpretation of the court. So with that, I've emailed the necessary amendments to our administrator, so I hope she has them. Maybe she can nod at me. Thank you, Valentina.
So share them now. Thank you.
Yes, I'm gonna call the amendment on Senate Bill 184, which is marked as personal sickness. And what this amendment does, it is LCO 17. Oh no, that's the actual bill that we're modifying. There is no LCO for our amendment. I'm sorry. I'll let you distribute them and then I'll explain what they are. Does that work with the chairs?
Thank you, Senator. give us a minute to get them to the committee members, and we'll get back together. Madam Clerk, if you could distribute the amendments, please. These amendments are being distributed via email, so the members can please check their email accounts. Madam Clerk, you're able to circulate the amendments?
I have, they haven't gone yet. I haven't received it myself yet either. I have sent it. I'm still waiting for it to show up in my inbox though.
Your inbox or your outbox?
Well, I sent them to myself and then I BCC'd everyone, so, but it still hasn't
Gotcha.
showed up in my inbox. It does show on my sent.
Understood.
Okay, there you go. I just received it. I hope everyone else did as well.
Thanks, Madam Clerk. I received an email with what appears to be 3 amendments attached. There's Senator Sampson, I believe you're referring to what's entitled Senate Bill 184 Amendment, Sampson Master Personal Sickness. That's the amendment you're referring to?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
We'll give members another brief minute just to open the amendment if you can. Some members have received the email with the amendment. Senator Sampson, the floor is still yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And please understand that I am offering these amendments today out of no disrespect to the chairs and our mutual agreement to continue discussing this language. I just felt that it was appropriate, since we brought this solution to the table, that we share it with the committee and the public, that this is where the Republican members are coming from, what we would like to see as a compromise. I am certainly willing to work on this language also. This amendment simply changes the proposal from redefining the acceptable reason for an absentee ballot that currently exists in statute, which is my illness. In other words, the elector's personal illness, as an acceptable reason to get an absentee ballot, to something far beyond that, which is in the amendment that I'm offering, would change that to such electors or persons' sickness or reasonable fear of contracting a sickness or of exacerbating an underlying condition of such elector or person or an immediate family member or dependent as a result of appearing at such polling place. We can work on this language as much as we would like. The purpose is simply to mirror the Supreme Court's interpretation, which is that the state constitution is vague enough in their opinion to imply that the sickness that is stated as a potential excuse is more than just that person's personal sickness. As I said, the difference between this language and what is being proposed in Senate Bill 184 is that in Senate Bill 184, the mere word illness is a complete intangible that does not tie the voter to the illness in any way. And effectively means that every person becomes eligible because illness, which just is not a way to write a law properly, in my opinion, and certainly doesn't do justice to the constitutional language or the intent that is before us. I move adoption of the amendment before us, Mr. Chairman, and I would like a roll call vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Motion has been made to move adoption. I've not yet seen a second.
Second, sir.
Seconded by Representative Carpino. Roll call vote will be taken. Representative Mashpowski, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Carpino, for that second motion. I got a little distracted. I wasn't paying attention for a moment. Just real quickly, Senator Sampson laid everything out very well in his explanation. I completely agree with him 100%. And I think a lot of the Republican members, I would assume, would agree as well. When I look at Senate Bill 184, when they talk about illness, everything in the bill is always referring to an individual. And I do agree that the Supreme Court decision, I don't agree with it. I don't believe people, when they vote because of an illness, that they are assuming that it's somebody else's illness, and it's very broad. I think this amendment is perfect. It's a step in the right direction, and it clarifies for the people and for the courts as well for a potential future lawsuit. I see a lot of times in the bills that we pass in the language that it's they're very subjective. It's based on what your reading of it is. And I think this clarifies it much broader, and certainly to an advantage for the voter to be, if they are ill or if they're afraid of COVID, if they're a fear of illness, really explains it very well. So I would urge the members of the committee to support it. I appreciate the chairmans to continue this negotiation and to keep the communications open. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Representative, any further question or comments? Seeing no further question or comments, I just would like to make a point. I thank Senator for his amendment and the Representative Mashpowski for her comments and effort so far. I'm going to ask my colleagues to not support the amendment before draft before us today, in the hopes that we can work on the language to be used and potentially incorporate it in the coming days. But I do thank the Senator and the ranking member for their efforts thus far, but I ask my colleagues to vote no. Any further question or comments? Seeing. So Representative Fishbein, your hand up. I can't
Yes,
up
sir.
your hand. So I just called the white background. The floor is yours, sir. Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. I just, Mr. Chairman, with that comment, I respect the committee process, and I would have hoped that working on this language would happen before this vote that's happening at the very advent of the session. Certainly this committee has plenty of time to address, to vote on, to contemplate, to work on language. I don't know of any election that perhaps this would affect that's going to happen before the end of session. So, I must say I'm a little disheartened in the representation that there are going to be discussions, but we're ramming this down your throat. So I just wanted to, I thought it was appropriate to respond to that. I try and negotiate in good faith, but if that's the intent, you don't vote on this today. You take a few weeks, you work together collectively for the residents of our state. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Representative, any further question or comments? Seeing no hands raised. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Flexer,
Senator Flexer votes yes. Oh, excuse me, Senator Flexer votes no. I apologize. I was so focused on my screen getting the box around it, I forgot. I apologize. Senator Flexer votes no.
thank you. Fox,
Representative Fox votes no.
Haskell,
Senator Haskell votes no.
Thomas,
I'm still chuckling, but Representative Thomas votes no.
Sampson,
Senator Sampson votes yes.
Mastro Francesco,
Representative Mastro Francesco votes yes.
Blumenthal,
Representative Blumenthal votes no.
Carpino,
Representative Carpino votes yes.
Fishbein,
Representative Fishbein votes in line with Senator Flexer's first iteration and votes yes.
France,
Representative France votes yes.
Haddad,
Representative Haddad votes no.
Labriola,
Representative Labriola votes yes.
McCarthy Vehy,
Representative McCarthy Vahey votes no.
McCrory, Senator McCrory, Moran Bello,
Representative Moran Bello votes no.
Palm,
Representative Palm votes no.
Rosario,
Rep. Rosario votes no.
Santiago,
Representative Santiago votes no.
Slap,
Senator Slapp votes no.
Comments or questions? I don't see any. I want to thank you for.
one more time, Senator, please.
Senator Slapp votes no.
Thank you. Senator McCrory,
Senator McCrory votes no.
all set, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Clerk, will you please announce the tally?
Six yea, 13 nay.
6 yea, 15 nay. The amendment fails. Any further discussion on, well, I believe Senator Sampson, the floor remains yours, so please proceed, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, I just want to just follow up on some of the commentary. You know, the thing is, we've been down this road many, many times in the past of trying to work, you know, across the aisle to try and come up with solutions to things. And sometimes it goes easier than others. I trust the chairs are certainly telling me the truth, that they are working with us in good faith to get to an end result. At the same time, I know that doesn't always happen, and that's why I felt it was important today for at least getting our position in the form of that amendment on the record, and to show that you know, we are certainly trying to accommodate at least the intent of the bill as described by the majority. Just we use a little different language to get there, which I think is more appropriate. That said, Mr. Chairman, I have another amendment I'm going to offer, and this amendment is a result of the failure of the previous amendment and the concerns that I laid out in my opening remarks, which is simply that if this bill passes in the form that is before us without being changed, it will effectively create no excuse absentee voting without a constitutional amendment. In fact, I would offer to any person on this committee to challenge that notion and explain to me exactly how an intangible definition of illness does not apply to every voter in Connecticut. And as a result, there would be an eligibility factor that every person and every voter in the state would suddenly be eligible for a absentee ballot. And this creates a giant problem, in my opinion, because that sets up the ability to send out a large number of unsolicited ballot applications. The reason why we've never seen an election like the one we had in 2020 is that for 100 years, basically, everyone understood that in order to be able to vote by an absentee vote through the mail, you had to qualify by having one of the excuses apply to you. This would redefine those excuses in a way that illness applies to every person, because illness is not tagged to a person either directly or indirectly. It just is. And would essentially create an incentive for the mailing of those ballot applications, either by the state itself, depending on which party is in power and whether they feel it will help them or not, a municipality, as we saw some in the 21 election. It's worth noting, by the way, that COVID didn't begin in 2020, stop in 21, and then come back in 2022. And it's worth noting that we had a perfectly normal election in 2021, except that there was the exception that I do believe that some folks did continue to stretch the definition of illness in that election. But I want you folks to just consider something very quickly before I offer this amendment, and that is that the danger of creating no excuse absentee voting without the proper protections for mail-in voting, signature verification, some way to identify the voters and to tabulate the results properly. You are creating a very, very bad incentive for people that want to commit election fraud or otherwise disrupt the election. If the state chooses to send out the ballots, at least they are going to every person and then some, which is the problem that I've already described with the voter rolls. But if the state does not choose to do it, what you are doing is you are enabling ballot harvesting on a grand scale. You are inviting any actor on anyone with money or a reason to interfere in that election to target voters that they believe are on the same side as them for whatever candidate or issue is up for an election. And they will simply figure out who those voters are, and they will send absentee ballot applications to those identified voters. We witnessed some of that in 21. Historically, people have always used absentee ballots in elections, but they've always had the caveat that it would only work for people that actually qualify under the statute. If everyone qualifies, you are opening the door to wild amounts of mailing of ballot applications. And just consider that even on a level playing field where you have a Democratic candidate mailing their targeted voters and Republicans mailing their targeted voters, you're going to leave out a lot of people, which I believe disenfranchises those folks that didn't end up on either list of potential Republican or Democrat voters in that election. It is not a proper way to do things. And I'm going to caution this committee once again, everything that I'm saying is for the purpose of protecting the integrity of our elections and giving the citizens of this state confidence that our process is legitimate and fair. If I'm so frustrated sometimes because the argument that I heard during the public hearing, which I did not hear from members of this committee, thankfully, but Democratic members of our state and Democratic voters seem to have the impression, and I don't know where they get it from, but that every Republican who speaks about voter integrity is really after trying to suppress the vote. I can assure anyone listening that that's the exact opposite. The previous amendment was designed to expand the definition of illness to satisfy almost any possible situation. And this amendment here today is to protect the integrity of the vote by prohibiting the unsolicited mailing of absentee ballot applications by any person. In my opinion, what needs to happen is we need to fix our process for mail-in voting if we're going to have it. And we need to do that first before expanding it. And the best solution for now, until that happens, is to simply prohibit the mailing of ballot applications to anyone unless that voter requests it. Some might say that, well, some voters might not be in an easy position to request their ballot application, but frankly, that's nonsense. If you can manage to fill out a ballot and cast your vote, you can manage to apply for a ballot application to vote by mail if you need one. And this amendment essentially creates that situation where only the voter themselves can apply for a ballot application, and no one, not the state, not a town, not a political candidate, political party, or outside activist organization will have the ability to pick and choose who gets mail-in votes applications or not. I move adoption for this amendment also, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if, I know it's been distributed. It is entitled, well, I don't know, it doesn't have a title other than the title of the bill, but I hope everyone can identify which one it is. It is 14 lines long and essentially modifies the language specifically to state that no person, including any state and local official, shall mail or deliver unsolicited applications for absentee ballots to any other person unless such other person has requested such application. And that's as simple as it gets. As I said, I move adoption. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I believe the amendment as distributed is entitled SB 184 Amendment Sampson Mastro Unsolicited. I believe that's the amendment, sir.
That is the file name. Yes, sir.
So the amendment's been circulated. We'll give committee members a minute or two to open it up, perhaps, or a second or two. It's on the same email sent out prior approved by the clerk. You should all the email. It's been moved. Is there a second? Representative Mastrosky, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a few comments on the amendment that Senator.
Before we make, I think we need a second on the amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry. A second. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Representative.
Twice I did that today. It's been a long day and it's not even Friday yet. Thank you.
Representative, the floor is yours. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the amendment. During the 2020, we were voting on using COVID as an excuse to vote. You know, every Republican voted for it. Everybody supported it. And I don't want anybody on this committee to think that we are not in favor of expanding access to voting. And I think Senator Sampson summed that up pretty well. We hear that a lot, and nothing could be further from the truth. All we are asking for is to have some checks and balances in place. Increasing access to voting helps everybody. It helps all the candidates on both sides of the aisle. So I think it is a good thing as long as we have the protections in place. And during the 2020, when we supported the absentee ballots because of COVID, I don't think anybody thought that the Secretary of State was going to do a mass mailing of applications for ballots. And what I heard from my constituents, and I still hear to today, the ones that are very concerned about it, is they've gotten 4 ballots, 5 or 6 ballots. And I think even the confusion was because we had the August primary and then we had the November election. And they were very confused on which application to send back. So I think this is a step in the right direction, Mr. Chairman, because we have lost a lot of voter confidence in the state. And the reason we've lost it in many ways is because of that mass mailing of those applications. And clearly, if somebody wants to vote, they can certainly pick up the phone, go on the internet. There's many, many ways that they can request a ballot. Nobody's trying to suppress the vote. And I think it's just a step in the right direction. We need to get back the confidence in the people of Connecticut, because I think what happens as well is that when people feel that their vote is not counting, they are concerned about it. Many times they don't go out and vote at all. And that certainly is not going to increase our voter people coming out to vote. So I think this is a really good amendment, a step in the right direction. I would hope that my colleagues would support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions or comments on the underlying amendment? Seeing none, Senator Sampson, I believe you have a request, but I believe you for a roll call vote, sir.
I would like a roll call vote. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Flexer. Senator Flexer votes no. Fox.
Representative Fox votes no.
Haskell. Senator Haskell. Thomas.
Representative Thomas votes no.
Sampson.
Senator Sampson votes yes.
Master Francesco.
Representative Mastro Francesco votes yes.
Blumenthal.
Representative Blumenthal votes no.
Carpino.
Representative Carpino votes yes.
Fishbein.
Representative Fishbein votes yes. Can I vote for Haskell too? Oh, okay, thank you.
France.
Representative France votes yes.
Haddad.
Representative Haddad votes no.
Labriola.
Representative Labriola votes yes.
McCarthy Vehy.
Representative McCarthy Vehy votes no.
McCrory. Senator McCrory. Morin Bello.
Representative Morin Bello votes no.
Palm.
Representative Palm votes no.
Rosario.
Representative Rosario votes no.
Santiago.
Representative Santiago votes no.
Slap. Senator Slap.
All right, Senator Slap votes no.
Senator Haskell.
Monday with one of those. Haskell votes no.
Those sorts of events.
Senator McCrory. All set, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. When it's ready, please announce the roll.
Six yea, 12 nay, 1 absent.
6 yea, 12 nay, 1 absent. The amendment fails. Senator Sampson, the floor is still yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm disappointed, of course, that that amendment failed as well, though I do understand. I would just say that I'm disappointed that in the case of both amendments that we did not have any discussion. I think I've been very clear in my positions, and I've offered to the committee the opportunity to challenge me on any of my statements. And I leave that door open. So if someone wants to have a discussion with me about the language of illness in this bill and its intangible nature and how we need to at least tie it back to the voter in some way, even if it's not their direct sickness and rather their indirect sickness. And also on the subject of the mass mailing, there is a lot of information out there, and I had originally planned on spending quite a bit of this committee meeting itemizing the problems with that 2020 election as a result of that unsolicited mass mailing. But suffice it to say, we've already covered the cost. We've talked about the unbelievable number of returned ballot applications. As far as I know, there has been nothing done on a grand scale to revise our list in a way that would improve that dramatically. That's not to say that there aren't very good and hardworking people in our state working in the registrar's office and the town clerks attempting to do so. But I believe they are somewhat, their hands are tied by the process and the Secretary of State's authorization to do certain types of cleanup on the voter rolls. There were 51,000 absentee ballots that were mailed after they were requested that remain unaccounted for. So 51,000 people actually requested an absentee ballot, but then didn't send it in. Were those people better off, I would ask the committee, than someone who voted in person? Hundreds of ballots were lost in the mail. Again, I already described that hundreds of ballots were received after Election Day and therefore not counted. There are historical documentation and records of people who have used absentee ballots for the commission of fraud, notably in Democratic primaries in our major cities. We've had people testify in our committee about how people are paid in actual dollars or in drinks at the local bar to go obtain absentee ballots on behalf of various candidates. There's the notorious case of a landlord in Bridgeport, even before this unsolicited mailing, who requested absentee ballot applications on behalf of his tenants, intercepted them and completed their ballots and sent them in, and he was recently prosecuted. This is the kind of thing that you are asking for when you do such a rampant expansion of this type of process without any care or concern for promoting and protecting the integrity of that election. And it can be done easily. Other states have very simple but effective means to make sure that the mail-in voting works properly. I still think that it ought to be a small part of our election. I think the majority of people prefer to vote in person if they can. We certainly could be faced with another pandemic or other situation that might call for an expansion of mail-in voting. It would be nice in that case for us to actually have a workable solution in the form of signature verification or other type of voter ID system that they use effectively in other states like California and Colorado, who do a great deal of mass or voting by mail. The organization fightvoterfraud.org, which has a website that anyone can visit, does a great deal of work documenting and filing complaints with the State Elections Enforcement Commission. People keep saying, well, all of these cases have been dismissed. I don't know that any of them have been dismissed, to be honest with you. I think that they are still being reviewed. And sadly, we have a protocol in the state that basically things can be reviewed without ever having a resolution. But there are documents that have been submitted to our Secretary of State and the State Election Enforcement Commission from Fight Voter Fraud and others documenting duplicate voters, out-of-state voters, incarcerated people voting. I mean, you can write a lengthy book about all of the potential problems. Again, my focus today was not to harp on those problems. My focus today was to offer two solutions to this committee that I do believe are bipartisan in nature. Certainly the first one was simply designed to incorporate the description of what the bill is supposed to do before us actually in the language versus what the language does. And the second one, obviously, much more of my concern over the integrity of the election. So I'm going to leave it right there. I will be voting no on Senate Bill 184 today. Mr. Chairman, I believe that the bill as written directly violates the Constitution because it does not, as the Supreme Court held, go back to the voter when it comes to illness. The Supreme Court said that the illness has to be tied to the voter, though it doesn't necessarily have to be the voter's personal illness. That was the intent of the amendment that it was offered. The bill creates an intangible illness, which does not tie to anyone and creates a backdoor method of no excuse absentee voting, as I mentioned, and that requires a constitutional amendment. Second reason, as I've already described, is the potential for problems and disenfranchised voters. And yes, some element of fraud potentially if we have another mass mailing election as a result of making everyone eligible. And finally, I would suggest that we should pass this bill properly this year by adopting both the amendments when we get to the floor of the House and Senate that were offered by us Republicans today. That would go a long way to securing the next election in November and satisfying everyone's concerns that it's going to be legitimate. And then we should do the next step, which is to pass no excuse absentee voting while simultaneously fixing our current absentee system and continuing to prohibit a unsolicited mailing election. And I bet if that were to happen, Mr. Chairman, we could pass it unanimously. And thank you very much for your indulgence today.
Thank you, Senator, for your comments. Representative hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief, but I do have a question on the underlying bill itself. I'm just curious that the core of the issue here is the definition of illness. And as we see it differently, we define it as someone's personal illness. The interpretation, I guess, of the person who wrote this bill is that their intent that the Supreme Court meant when they made their decision that the Supreme Court was referring to just illness as the mere existence of a disease or any illness at all, meaning that illness could be someone else's illness. I know it was very broad. I'm just trying to figure out what the intent of the proponent of the bill is when they were drafting that. Did they believe that the Supreme Court meant anyone's illness? Would you know that through you, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Representative. I'm not entirely sure. I can't speak to the intent of the individual who wrote the bill. I believe that the meaning of illness as used would be that as aligned with the pay decision, pay v. mayoral decision. I'm not sure. Is that helpful for your representative?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, where it's coming from, because if the Supreme Court ruling is in your mind that they meant just illness in general, it could be anyone's illness, then a constitutional amendment, an amendment to the Constitution really isn't necessary because it's already defined illness, and it could basically be no excuse absentee voting, nor would this bill be necessary. So that's why I was just trying to figure out what the intent of. Do they believe that they're really referring to one's personal feeling or fear or illness, or does the proponent believe that the Supreme Court meant just the mere existence of illness, is what I was trying to get to the core of. So as Senator Sampson said, and I certainly concur and I agree, I certainly can't support this bill in the form that it's in. I hope our communication will continue going forward so we can clarify the issue here of illness, along with the unsoliciting of applications for ballots, so we can move forward in the right direction to gain the trust of the people in Connecticut on the integrity of our elections here in Connecticut. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. To follow up to your question, I believe, reading from the court's opinion, the court stated, and I apologize for reading here, the court stated, we agree with the defendant's reading of the Article 6, Section 7, and conclude that the word sickness, as used therein, encompasses the existence of a specific disease, such as COVID-19 pandemic, addressed by Executive Order Number 7QQ, is not limited to an illness suffered by an individual voter. That's from the Supreme Court decision.
So thank you. I guess since you had mentioned that, so if that is their decision, if that's the interpretation of it, and that is their opinion, why is it necessary to pass this bill? It's the Constitution is supreme, right? What would be the purpose of it?
I believe the purpose is to closely align the statute with the Constitution. The language that appears in the Constitution will appear in statute.
Right. Okay. And I agree. I think the opinion is incorrect, and clearly in our Constitution, it's referring to one's own illness, such elector's illness. And clearly when people request an absentee ballot, they're clearly over decades assuming that it's their own. I don't know anybody out there that would request an absentee ballot because of someone else's illness, because of their neighbor, maybe for the fear that they're afraid that they're going to get sick. That's certainly understandable. But I think in the voters' mind, they clearly believe that it's referring to themselves. So I look forward to the continued discussion. Hopefully, we can come to some sort of an agreement and clarification on this issue for the voters of Connecticut. But as I mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I would not be supporting this today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions or comments, members of the committee? Seeing no further question or comments. Don't believe I see any. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Senate Bill 184, JFS to the floor. Flexer,
Senator Flexer votes yes.
Fox,
Representative Fox votes yes.
Haskell,
Senator Haskell votes yes.
Thomas,
Representative Thomas votes yes.
Sampson,
Senator Sampson votes no.
Mastro Francesco,
Representative Mastro Francesco votes no.
Blumenthal,
Representative Blumenthal votes yes.
Carpino,
Representative Carpino votes no.
Fishbein,
Representative Fishbein votes no.
France,
Representative France votes no.
Haddad,
Representative Haddad votes yes.
Labriola,
Representative Labriola votes no.
McCarthy Vehy,
Representative McCarthy Vehy passes.
McCrory, Moran Bello,
Representative Moran Bello votes yes.
Palm,
Representative Palm votes yes.
Rosario,
Rep. Rosario votes yes.
one more time, Representative, please.
Representative Rosario votes yes.
Santiago,
Representative Santiago votes yes.
Slack,
Senator Slab votes yes.
one more time, Senator, please.
Senator Slab votes yes.
Thank you. Senator McCrory,
Senator McCrory votes yes.
Representative McCarthy Vehy, I see you're muted. Would you like to vote now?
Yes, Madam Clerk, thank you. Representative McCarthy Vehy votes yes.
Thank you. All set, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Clerk, has everyone voted? Are there any members who have not yet voted?
Everyone has voted.
Okay. So for the time being, I don't see there a need to keep votes open for the time being. So Madam Clerk, you want to go ahead and announce the roll?
Yay, 6 nay.
The bill passes. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on to item 2 on today's agenda, House Bill 5262, an act revising certain absentee voting eligibility statutes. There'll be a motion to JFS LCO 3096. Is there a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved. Seconded.
Moved by Flexer, second by Representative Blumenthal. The bill before us, the JFS language before us changes the word illness in line, what happened to the word illness to sickness. Further track the Constitution's language, the edit, it's in lines 12 and 43 of the JFS language. Any discussion? Senator Sampson, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I covered a lot of the same information in the previous debate on Senate Bill 184, but there are some significant differences in this bill from that one. First off, this bill is much shorter, and it does not, as far as I can tell, contemplate COVID-19. Mr. Chairman, is COVID-19 covered or contemplated in the bill before us?
Thank you for the question, Senator. COVID-19 is not specifically named, referenced in the bill, although I believe it could fall within the definition of the word sickness in line 12. Through you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your description of the bill, and I understand that the substitute language did modify the word in the current statute from illness to sickness, but the important part of the bill language is the removal of some language, and that is the words such electors or persons ahead of the word illness or sickness, whichever the case may be. I don't know that there's a reason to change that word, but I understand that it was done. We covered this issue in the previous debate, but I just want to point out a couple of things. In the previous discussion on Senate Bill 184, the word "my" exists before the word physical disability or their physical disability. Such electors' physical disability. Forgive me, that's what it actually says. That language is being removed in this bill before us, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell me the effect of removing such electors or persons in lines 11 and 12?
Thank you, Senator. I believe the reason was to more closely align the language with that language contained in the Constitution. Through you.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Chairman. By virtue of aligning it with the Constitution, which I think is a debatable conversation, what does it actually do? I mean, I'm trying to, if I had to describe this to a voter, what effectively changes? Just a casual observer like me would say, it used to be you could get an absentee ballot only if you had a physical disability under item number 4. There's the other reasons also, but number 4 says one of those reasons is you have a physical disability, such electors. Now it just says physical disability. So whose physical disability are we referring to, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I think it's important to read this first section with section 2 of the bill, in the sense that you're not only sitting on physical disability, you'll be affirming by penalty of potential perjury, but if you are proven to not have reason to get the AB. But I think to answer your question, physical disability is your cause for being unable to vote in person, then you may be able to get an absentee ballot for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but whose physical disability?
I believe this, thank you, Senator. I believe this refers to the individual's physical disability, as well as, let's say, if a physical disability, my understanding of physical disability language would potentially allow it to be if you had a physical, if you had, let's say you didn't have a driver's license and the individual who was driving you was physically disabled on election day. That physical disability might be reason for you to get an absentee ballot through this language, through you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So effectively, we would be changing the statute that currently says that only if you are personally affected by a physical disability, and updating it to now suggest that if some other person's physical disability affects your ability to get to the polls. Am I understanding your interpretation correctly, Mr. Chairman?
Through you, Senator, yes, through you.
Okay, that's my understanding of what is intended, but not what it says. And I bring that up simply because it's a direct parallel with the conversation about illness. By virtue of removing the words such elector or persons ahead of the words illness and physical disability, you are indeed expanding it to things beyond that person. But you are also expanding it much farther by virtue of not suggesting that that physical disability has anything to do with that voter directly, because there's nothing in this language that says, as you described, that the person taking you to the polls is disabled. It could be because some person you've never met in a foreign country has a physical disability. I believe under the language that is before us, that would be a perfectly acceptable reason to get an absentee ballot. Is there anything to indicate that I am incorrect about the interpretation that I'm offering, Mr. Chairman?
Senator, your interpretation is that you believe the language would allow physical disability of someone in a different country for you to get an absentee ballot?
Someone completely unrelated and unaffecting the elector.
I don't believe that interpretation is correct. At least my reading is different.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And would you say the same thing about the reference to illness? When we take out such electors or persons ahead of the word illness and simply say that you are eligible for an absentee ballot because of illness, quote unquote, without any language indicating whose illness we're referring to, it could be referring to some person you've never met, or not even an actual illness, but just the word illness, or an illness that has yet to occur or occurred way in the deep past. That's the way I read it, Mr. Chairman. Do you read it differently?
Thank you, Senator. And I just quick clarification that the JFS language changed the word illness to sickness. And so my interpretation of the word sickness in that is how defined by the Supreme Court, in that it is used to compass the existence of a specific disease such as COVID-19 and is not limited to an illness suffered by an individual voter.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, the Constitution, I don't think has ever been considered vague. This constitutional amendment has existed since 1932, as I mentioned earlier. And if you read the entire sentence in its, there are some, including punctuation, I believe it's quite clear that the Constitution is referring to the individual elector. I don't want to belabor this point too much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to have a little dialogue with you so that we could illustrate the concern. And the overall concern is that you and I just had this conversation, and I think that a lot of people who are looking at these things would be scratching their head too, because it's vague. That's the bottom end of the conversation right there. It's vague. It's hard to know what exactly is being contemplated. I believe the constitutional language is very clear. They're talking about the actual voter. I believe that our statute has always been very clear and is today that it refers to the actual voter. The reason why the statute was written the way it was and never questioned ever since 1946, I believe, even though it referred to that elector's personal illness and that elector's personal physical disability, is because I believe everyone recognized that that's what the Constitution said too. It is only in this recent discussion that it's been brought into question that someone else's illness or disability could be a factor. And now it's actually even more complicated because we're having this conversation about whether or not someone's illness or disability that doesn't even affect the voter could be a factor. And that's what the Supreme Court language that you just read, although I think if you read the entire Supreme Court decision, they do tie it back to the voter more so than in the statement than you're reading. And that is my concern with this, and it continues. And regardless of what the result of our discussions are going forward, Mr. Chairman, I really cannot point out strongly enough that this can't stay the way it is. We should decide what it means and put that down. We can debate it or determine whether it's constitutional in a separate conversation, but the majority needs to figure out what they're trying to do here. If they want to expand illness and disability so that the voters' ability to get an absentee ballot extends beyond that person's individual illness or sickness or disability to something that affects them because of another person, I think that's fine. And that was the amendment that we offered on the previous bill. If a majority wants it to mean simply because illness, that's the creation of no excuse absentee voting. And that's what I have objected to. Again, I've gone way too long on that, but I did want to touch on it again to make it extremely clear that when you start putting things like because of illness, the next question is whose illness? And if it's not specified whose illness, that means anyone's and at any time, anywhere. And that's too vague to have in our statute. And I don't think that's a proper conforming bit of language to our Constitution. I will point out just a couple of other things too, which is that I understand the removing of in line 10, the words during all of the hours of voting. The Constitution says on the day of the election by qualified voters of the state who are unable to appear at the polling place on the day of election. I think it's important if you are working on this language going forward to put that back in because it could be read that anyone's absence from town on a day other than the day of election could be meant by the statute and therefore it would be unconstitutional. So just a thought about making sure if we're going to actually make this conform, we do it correctly. Just looking through my notes. Again, I had a lot more to say today, but in an interest of trying to just...
briefly to that comment?
Sure, Mr. Chairman.
Just one quick clarification. I'm not sure if it gets to your point about the hours of voting during the day. I appreciate that comment. Something we kind of tried to wrestle with. The reference back up in line 7 during the hours of voting. I'm not sure if that will it may not address your specific, but I think it might. I think it would go toward. It might go towards your concern that last comment made about the election day.
I thank you for that comment, Mr. Chairman, but I don't believe so.
Okay.
Because the language in line 7 refers to whether or not that elector can appear on that day, and the whole point is as a result of these other things, illness, no matter how it's defined. But because they are absent from the person's voting residence is all it says now. I agree that it would be very hard to make the case that you cannot show up on election day because you were absent on another day, but that's effectively what it says. And that's why I believe that we need to include the language that does appear in the Constitution reflecting the day of election in that appropriate number 2 on line 10. And I agree that we should change it because I believe the during all hours of voting is even more restrictive essentially than the Constitution is. And that's it. I'm gonna leave my comments there. I was gonna offer the same 2 amendments on this bill. They are just as important on this one, but I believe the committee and anyone watching has already gotten the point. I will again offer to members of the committee. You know, it's sad to me, very, very sad that we had just a partisan party line vote. Yeah, the Republicans voted yes on the amendments, the Democrats voted no. And then on the bill itself, you know, it was another party line vote. To be honest with you, we are not doing a service to our constituents if we can't have this conversation in the committee and come to a solution. That is the whole point of having a legislature and having a committee process. And it's so frustrating. I spent hours and hours and hours preparing today. I could have gone on for 10 hours discussing all of the ramifications of mail-in voting, the constitutional history of the language that exists on absentee voting, and countless other side issues that affect this decision. And I didn't do that for my health. I did that because I care, and that I think it's super important that when we're dealing with making laws that affect the citizens of Connecticut, that we get it right. And honestly, we ought to have a conversation that is focused on making good policy as well as moving the agenda of whatever party is in power. And I understand, Mr. Chairman, that you serve in a specific role, and you're doing the best you can. And I appreciate that very much. And I do appreciate our conversation with both chairs today, saying that we're going to continue to have this conversation. And I really hope that does happen. But in my view, we could have that conversation right here in the open with the members. I see Representative Thomas on the screen, for instance. I'm sure she disagrees with half of what I said today, and I would love to hear why, because that's the only way we're going to actually get to the bottom of this. Please know that my goal is noble in that I am actually trying to create language that mirrors what the majority has said they want the bill to do. That was the purpose of the First Amendment that I offered, because it's not what I want, but I think that if that's what we're going to get, we ought to do it as clearly as we can. And the language that's in both of these bills just doesn't do that. And I will be a no for the same reasons I mentioned on the first one. And I will again urge us to solve all these problems by doing an appropriate constitutional amendment for no excuse absentee voting, getting rid of unsolicited mailing of applications, and fixing our mail-in voting system with signature verification and other safeguards. I think that's something that we all can agree is necessary, and we could get 100% unanimity if we had legislation like that before this committee and before both bodies, or both chambers rather. And thank you for the time and indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Ashcroft, your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very brief. Once again, Senator Sampson pretty much covered everything. I certainly concur. I do have a question though, and I know that the language in this particular bill is referencing the word sickness. There was a bill, and I think almost identical, that we voted on last year that I believe that referred to illness. What I'm trying to figure out is, and I understand they're trying to conform what the Supreme Court's decision is and what our Constitution says. What is the difference between illness and sickness?
Thank you, Representative. In terms of the difference, I think the word sickness is used. My understanding, the word sickness is used simply because it's used in the Constitution and was referenced in the Fay v. Merrill case. So beyond that, I'm not sure there's much of a difference for you.
Okay, so the definition or the meaning of illness and sickness are in the committee's mind the same. When I look at the word sickness, sickness is almost referred to commonly as anyone's sickness. And that's why I was wondering, is that the reason why it was changed to sickness? It's always been illness in the bill, in the Constitution. It's always been that way. So I'm just trying to understand, just because the Supreme Court said one thing doesn't necessarily mean that we have to change it that way, because it's been under illness for decades. So I'm just trying to find out what the determination, what is the difference between the two that we would even have to change it, aside from trying to conform to what the Supreme Court said.
Thank you, Representative. I think the purpose of the underlying bill is to align the language in the statute with the language of the Constitution. For many years, the language in the statute was not exact as language in the Constitution. The Constitution used the phrase because sickness or physical disability. And for many years, the statutes instead, for some whatever reason, I'm not sure the purpose behind it, would originally include the word illness, I believe. And so the word sickness is being used just to closely mirror the language in the Constitution.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Chairman. Again, I will just reiterate, I think it's really important that we continue the conversation, and this has to be clarified for the voter on what sickness or illness is, whether it's your personal illness, the mere existing of sickness in the world. And I think it's important that we continue the discussions on that. And I certainly hope that we do, and I think that we will. But in the meantime, I certainly cannot support this, but let's hope going forward that we can resolve all these issues. You know, these issues on elections should never be partisan. They should always be nonpartisan, and everybody should agree to them. And I get very concerned when I hear statements coming out that Republicans are trying to suppress the elections, and that cannot be further from the truth. We are absolutely not doing that. We support it. And we support it so much that we want to work with the committee and the chairs to fix it, so we can all agree on it. There's nothing more than we want that this to be a bipartisan effort for the voters of Connecticut. So let's continue the discussion. But as I mentioned today, I can't support it today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions or comments? Seeing no further questions or comments, will the clerk please call the roll?
House Bill 5262J passed to the floor. Flexer,
Senator Flexer votes yes.
Fox,
Representative Fox votes yes.
Haskell,
Senator Haskell votes yes.
Thomas,
Representative Thomas votes yes.
Sampson,
Senator Sampson votes no.
Mastro Francesco,
Representative Mastro Francesco votes no.
Blumenthal,
Representative Blumenthal votes yes.
Carpino,
Representative Carpino votes no.
Fishbein,
Representative Fishbein votes no.
France,
Representative France votes no.
Haddad,
Representative Haddad votes yes.
Labriola,
Representative Labriola votes no.
McCarthy Vehy,
Representative McCarthy Vehy votes yes.
McCrory, Senator McCrory,
Yes. Senator McCoy votes an affirmative.
thank you. Morin Bello,
Representative Morin Bello votes yes.
Palm,
Representative Palm votes yes.
Rosario,
Representative Rosario votes yes.
Santiago,
Representative Santiago votes yes.
Slack,
Senator Slaff votes yes.
one more time, Senator, please.
Senator Slaff votes yes.
Sorry, one more time.
That's okay. Senator Slaff votes yes.
Thank you. All set, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Hey, Madam Clerk, is that everyone?
Yes, Mr. Chair, everyone voted.
So no need to keep the votes open. Please announce the roll.
Yes. Thirteen yea, 6 nay.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The bill passes. Next on the agenda is section 4, adjournment. Before we do that, our committee's public hearing is Friday at 10 a.m. Any further questions or comments from any members of the committee, ranking members or chairs? Seeing none, thank you for your efforts today. We will look forward to seeing you all Friday morning at 10 a.m. For the public hearing. Meetings now, motion to adjourn.
So moved by Santiago.
Second,
Second.
Fishbein. Representative, you get the second?
Did we adjourn?
Motion was made and seconded by Made by Santiago, second by Fishbein. We're now adjourned.